Tesla is taking Asia by storm, but is it a typhoon or are they merely raining around the top? A little bit of wordplay there. There's a whole lot going on, and the markets are still expanding. I'm joined today by Daren Jung from the @Daren Jung channel. Let's have a quick chat about that. I'm Brian. Welcome to Futuraza. Daren, so good to see you again.
Thank you for having me on your channel, and it was great seeing you the first time in Austria.
Yeah, Daren was a moderator of the panel that I was on at the X Takeover in Austria, where we had a chance to hang out all weekend and get to know each other. And any friend of the Tesla community is a friend of mine, I think, anyway. So Daren operates out of Singapore. He's got a fantastic YouTube channel covering all sorts of things electric, but mostly Tesla. And he has great production values and is, as far as I can tell, well respected. So that's great. So with that said, markets where Tesla sells, which countries is Tesla already in?
Let's talk about it. So in the context of Asia, the Tesla's been around in Japan, Australia, China, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong for a long time. And where they recently expanded was Singapore 3 years ago, Thailand almost 2 years ago, Malaysia just the beginning of this year, so under a year, and more markets are coming up. I think there is a lot more room for expansion for Tesla in Asia. It's not present in India yet. There are questions on product market fit, which we can talk about later on. There's still a lot of white space here. So I think that expansion will continue. And if you ask me, like, what are the next markets Tesla is going to open in the next 12 to 18 months? Potentially Vietnam. I think Vietnam is a good market to open to, given the number of charging infrastructure. And a fun fact is, Vietnam is the only country in Southeast Asia that has a local EV manufacturer, VinFast. So some of you in the US may have seen some VinFast vehicles. They're trying to penetrate into the US market, and the Vietnamese government's also looking and exploring EVs. So I see Vietnam's the next expansion market for Tesla, then potentially followed by Indonesia. And India is a big question on really, do we have a $25,000 car? How do we deal with import tariffs? That's a big discussion.
It is a very big discussion. India, of course, famously said, if you want to come here and spend $2 billion, we'll let you import 8,000 cars, which is not great. That's not quite enough gravy on top to make that make sense. Yeah, Korea has had some reasonable sales volume. And if we start checking off countries on the list, we're getting through them. Now, of course, you included Australia. I don't know. I mean, we call that just Australia, but Australia and New Zealand both have Tesla in their markets, and they're doing reasonably well. So what is the sentiment towards Tesla in these markets? You've traveled around quite a bit. How is the brand perceived?
The brand's perceived in different ways. Let's start from north of Asia and work our way downwards. You look at Japan, Tesla's penetration in Japan has been really low the past 2 years. And like EV penetration in general was really low as recently as the past 2 years. Tesla really picked up within the past 2 years. I heard from owners in Japan that there was a change in the country manager. There was more urgency. You can see a lot more communication, opening supercharger locations, and it really gave people the encouragement to get Teslas. So EV penetration is really low in Japan in general, not just Teslas, but all EVs of any kind. And it's not as easy for a Chinese company to sell EVs in Japan. There's also a lot of pride to buy a made in Japan vehicle. But equally, Japan's a market where it may be slow, but once it takes off with a vengeance. We saw that play out on phones. So when Apple first launched, the iPhone didn't immediately become a hit. It took some time, but now iPhone's like 50% of the phone market in Japan. So foreign brands can be successful, and I've seen that happen specifically with American brands like Apple. It's harder for other Asian brands to win in Japan, given how much they love their local manufacturing industry. In Japan as used to be the world's largest car exporter until China took over in recent years. So EV penetration, I may be wrong, but I think it's 5 to 8% at this stage. So for Asia, that's considered relatively low. And as for a developed market and for a market where Tesla has been around for so long, that's actually really low. But again, it's really low on a very small base. It's picking up in recent years, especially the past 2 years. I normally go to Japan most years and I'm seeing more Teslas, but it's still few and far in between. So lots of white space, but it's a mindset shift in Japan. And when we go further down when we look at
Well, a quick question on Japan is how much of it is that they don't like EVs at all, and how much of it is Tesla specific?
I find that it's more EVs at all. So when you look at the local brands like Toyota, they aren't really promoting EVs. Typically in a market, EVs succeed when your local champions are driving EV adoption. So when you look at South Korea, for instance, Hyundai, Kia, they're pushing EVs. You see EV adoption as an overall market go up significantly. When Toyota, Nissan, and Honda are not pushing for EVs, they're asking you to consider hybrids or hydrogen vehicles. That creates resistance in perception. And of course, the government has less incentive to drive EV adoption when your champions, imagine like if GM and Ford did not go EVs, how much incentive does the current administration have on pushing EVs? So similar situation in some extent in Japan.
And that is a good point. If it was only Tesla and BYD and Aura and some of the other Chinese brands in the European market, I don't think we'd see as much support in terms of legislation and incentives and upcoming rules and regulations. So that's a good point. Okay, so still talking brand perception, moving south from Japan.
Let's go further down. Then we've got South Korea. Tesla's been there for some time. They have the entire sexy range. The local brands, again, Hyundai, Kia, they're ramping up on EVs. The local companies make great EVs. So if you ever got a chance to drive Kia EV6 or Hyundai Ioniq 5 or 6, those are good vehicles. The Kia EV9, a great 7-seater. For many EV owners, a pain point has been, give me a great 7-seater that doesn't cost a Model X. I want a great EV 7-seater that's, let's say, under 60,000 US dollars. It's hard to find good options. And the Korean companies are putting out some good options. Tesla is well received. There's a positive perception of Tesla in South Korea. Of course, again, like in many Asian countries with local manufacturing, there's always that sense of pride. Why aren't you buying a Kia at Hyundai? What's so compelling about Tesla? And the answer is, it is a pretty compelling vehicle. There's nothing like the hardware and software integration coming together. The world's most impressive light show was done in South Korea. So there's a reason why there's so much support when they did that light show in that stadium with 1,000 vehicles fully choreographed. Even Simon was wondering, how did they do that and how can we emulate that? It's much harder for other foreign brands to be successful in South Korea. I think Elon Musk plays a net positive role for Tesla's perception in South Korea. They love entrepreneurs. South Korea is a country with a lot of large chaebols or conglomerates. And what is Elon Musk's companies if not a large chaebol like a Samsung or an LG? So people understand that in South Korea, people are attracted to very innovative, very large brands. If Apple launched a car, South Korea would have been a potentially strong market for them, but they didn't. And Tesla, I think, is on the right track. Sales come up and down in South Korea. EV adoption still has room to grow, but I'll say that's an okay market. That's an average market, and Tesla continues to get decent momentum in South Korea. The brand is positive.
And what about Singapore?
So there's still a few more to come the way down Singapore. Now let's look at Greater China. So Hong Kong, Tesla's been there in very early days. In Hong Kong, the way that they tax vehicles and the price of petrol is so high that it doesn't make economic sense to buy an ICE car for many years. You'd be insane to not buy an EV, not because you want a cleaner environment or a better car. Like you just want the most affordable car. It's still an EV in Hong Kong. That's why EV adoption in Hong Kong is 60%. And Hong Kong has, I believe, more than 20,000, probably up to 30,000 Tesla vehicles. You see Teslas everywhere. You see a Model X everywhere. It is all over the territory. And I think that's as close to Norway as we can get in Asia right now. If you go to Hong Kong, you just see Teslas everywhere. That's like how you see EVs in every street in Norway. Then we've got the mainland China side, which is now 60% EV adoption. You see EVs with their own car plate colors. So there's green, there's blue plate for ICE, hybrid, and also EVs. For the Chinese government, EVs are not just something for consumers to adopt or for sustainability. It's a matter of national priority. So for the government, they realize that they're late into auto industry. So the way to win in auto industry is not to make the best ICE car, but to leapfrog and make the best EV, because that's the future of the industry. And they've been laser focused on that. Some say that the government's provided subsidies to large brands like BYD, and it's why you see tariffs being introduced in the US and in EU as recent as this week. But what's happened is EV adoption from both as a government strategic priority and from a consumer mindset, I want a great car. That is one of the best in the world outside of Norway. And China has every interest in driving EV adoption because they're now the world's largest exporter of cars, beating the Japanese companies in recent years. And a quarter of all cars being exported from China are EVs. At this rate, half of all cars exported from China will be EVs. The challenge is they're getting more tariffs in the US and in Europe. And especially in Europe, that's a bit worrying because that, some feel, may slow down adoption of EVs. Because the way to drive fast adoption is cheap, fast, and good. And Chinese EVs, from the consumer perspective, are cheap, they are good enough, and they get you all the basics you need. Enough range, decent charging, decent interior and exterior, decent features, decent software. Software is miles ahead of most European car manufacturers, for instance. So that's where China is. A lot of aggressive growth, a lot of momentum. You see companies like Xiaomi launching EVs. There's still hundreds of companies in there. This is ripe for consolidation. There isn't a handful of large national champions like you see with the GM or Ford to the extent yet. Of course, everyone hears of BYD, but after BYD, it gets a lot smaller. There's Geely Group and there's a few others, but it's still a very competitive landscape. And that's why Tesla has the cheapest, well, most brands have the cheapest cars in the world in China.
Yes, and the Chinese market is very competitive. There were hundreds of these companies. Now there's merely 150 who are all still vying to be serious players. We hear about some of the bigger names like BYD and Geely and all the, but Li Auto, Neo and the like. But okay, so we're going to speed up a little bit, rapid fire on the next countries. The perception.
It's a net positive across Southeast Asia. Elon Musk is seen as an innovative entrepreneur. There will be, again, a handful of people who don't like his point of view, but that's a small minority. He's largely perceived as a very effective and successful and inspiring leader. Now, in Australia, New Zealand, people tend to be more vocal about their dislike on Elon Musk, and that plays out more. But even then, Tesla has actually been gaining good momentum. And I want to contrast this, like, you compare perceptions of Elon Musk in Asia and let's say parts of Europe. Like when we were in Berlin earlier for Tesla Takeover Europe, I remember doing a light show there were 3 cars, about 15 of us, and we're doing a light show like pretty near a police station, and people still just drove through, revved up their ICE cars, and they actually told us Tesla like they didn't even know us, and we were in front of a police station. And there were like 15 of us with 3 cars. Hey, imagine if this is 1 Tesla and 2 people there, it would have been potentially even more hostile. So we don't see that kind of behavior in Asia towards Tesla or Elon.
I see so much hostility towards Tesla from accounts in Germany. I saw one on X recently where this person was saying, well, I'll stick with my Mercedes because it does 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds and it can go 180 miles an hour. And I said, you're allowed to like your car, just because you like it. You don't have to impress anyone. There's a dozen EVs that go quicker than that. There's a handful that go faster than that. But you bought comfort. You wanted it. You got it. You enjoy it. Good for you. And her response was, well, I'm in Germany and I go maximum speed regularly. First of all, no, you don't. But you just told me everything I need to hear. You support the local brands, and that's it. That's
Yeah.
fine. There are people in the US who will only buy a brand that they've bought their whole life. Good for them.
Yes.
That's fine. It doesn't have to be everything to everyone. Why harass other people? What are the headwinds that Tesla faces in Asia?
Chinese brands are picking up a lot of momentum. BYD specifically is doing very well in Asia. Now, so Thailand is now BYD's largest market outside of China. They've just opened a factory in Thailand. It was 2 years in the making. That factory is a production capacity of 150,000 cars. Every time Tesla makes a price adjustment or price cut, which isn't always popular to owners because they feel that the car depreciates more, BYD often follows very quickly. Now, we've seen gigafactories, we've seen Fremont factory. We understand how Tesla justifies a profitable vehicle production. I don't understand how BYD can profitably make money at the price point that the cars are selling, but they persist and they do it. And this is almost like this is a national priority. Like BYD is at this stage where it's too big to fail. It's almost like the GM in the 1960s or 1950s, and it continues to expand. The BYD Atto 3, their crossover, the small SUV, is the top-selling vehicle in most markets in Southeast Asia. It does really well in Australia, New Zealand. They're trying to grow in North Asia. They're having resistance in India because in India, like they banned TikTok a few years ago. They're not as friendly towards Chinese companies in India.
Hmm. All crazy things. So, guys, in the comments, what do we miss? What do we misunderstand? What are your thoughts if you're especially in Southeast Asia? Let us know specifically. North Asia as well. Like, subscribe, head on over, see what Daren's up to there. His link will be in the description, both to his X account and his YouTube channel. Everybody else, like, subscribe, do the usual, and stay tuned, stay juicy, and I cannot wait to hear from you, clever robots, in part 2, which will be coming out in just a few days.